started to roll out Plex at our company, we realized we had some needs, especially as we crossed into Europe and to China, based on how those plants were already operating in terms of how they were replenishing their work centers. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our company, what we do, so you can kind of put it in perspective, and then the solution that we came up with working with Revolution Group. So we're pretty much divided evenly around the world with operations in the US, Europe, and Asia Pacific. We're not a big Honda supplier, but we do supply most of the OEMs. We make a variety of products. We're Tier 1 automotive. We make instrument panels, sunroofs, door modules, motors, window lift systems, latches. And we do injection molding, stamping, extrusion, those kinds of things. So I put this one slide in here just to show kind of an example of one of our layouts. This is a extrusion that we do in Mexico, actually. But in terms of multiple work centers, things moving from step to step, sometimes that's containers of parts, sometimes that's serialized individuals. So it depends on the product that we're making. They tend to vary quite a lot. But at the end of the day, usually the question that the plant comes back to us with is, how do I know what parts to bring to that line at the right time, based on what they're producing, if we're changing over or not. And so we're going to look at some of the different problems we ran into to answer that question and how we address those. So, like I mentioned, what parts are required? Where are they? When do I need them? And where do I need to take them to? And they wanted that in a very easily summarized, basically a pick list for the material handlers or replenishers or materialistas or whatever name they're giving in whatever country you're in. And so we said, well, there are some tools there. We're like, well, this has to be a thing that Plex does all the time, right? How are all you guys doing this in your various plants? And there were several different tools available, but none of them seemed to give us exactly what we were looking for. They were, we could look at min-max, we could look at monitoring moves of a part number or finished production, but none of them had a forward look in terms of, if I just set up a min-max at the work center, which we do at some of our work centers, really I'm assuming that I'm running the same kind of bill of material over and over again, and those are the kinds of parts I need. But it doesn't reflect if I'm making different kinds of parts with different bombs, and I could end up replenishing something that went below its min just because I thought I needed it, but I might not build that for another week, and really I didn't need to bring that there. I might not even have room at the work center for it. So what we ended up doing, and the other requirement was that we needed to look at FIFO, and we've always run with FIFO in mind at our U.S. plants. As we went into Europe and Asia, it definitely seemed to ratchet it up a notch in terms of it being a legal or an auditable requirement there, that we had to prove that we were getting FIFO oldest containers to bring to the line. They were very, very distraught if we told them that we couldn't tell or that we were enforcing FIFO. We also wanted to look at, sometimes that was an issue or a question inside of a building. So I've got my supermarket where I'm bringing parts from there to the line. But then we had a lot of outside warehouses, especially in China, tons of outside warehouses. And we wanted to know, well, it's a different question for those people. They want to know, what's the main building going to run out of that I need to bring within a certain time horizon to replenish that building before they run out. And then they also use a lot of consignment. So actually we did a little add-on to this product, what we developed later, to say, well, let's make a version of it that the consignment suppliers can look at to manage their inventory. Let's let them run the replenishment report so that they know what our plant will run out of in the next day or so, because they were doing lots of daily or multiple times a day replenishments to our plant. And the plants using that said, hey, if we can give that to our consignment suppliers, we can minimize the amount of material that we have to keep in our plant and increase the turns on that. So we wanted to, in terms of what parts do we need, we know that we have, sometimes fairly deep bills of materials. Say a latch could have 80 different parts in it. And we know that we have different quantities of those components in the BOM structure. And we found that it varied from plant to plant in terms of how far of a horizon they wanted. A lot of times it was, what do I need in the next 2 hours? What are they going to be running? Sometimes we had an operator or a material handler who was responsible for just one work center or a set of work centers, or maybe they had a collection of work centers they were replenishing. So that tended definitely to vary by plant in terms of how big they were, how fast they ran through parts, how much inventory space they had at the line, to determine what their time horizon was and and how many work centers they were replenishing. So you also have some complications with shared locations as well, which we'll talk about in a little bit later. So if you had shared source, certainly we had all sorts of trouble with, if I've got some shared source components on 2 lines, maybe I'm making a left and a right, and I'm trying to load to those, but I've got some shared components, and then people loading them to the wrong one, and then they weren't available. They were available, but the system didn't think they were available. So we definitely had some difficulties around that, and then also accommodating different standard packs for the material. I mentioned the different time windows. So we wanted to give the replenishment people as well the location that, so we had some things where we could give them that were, this is what's needed, but certainly Plex knows where all the different parts are and which ones are the oldest containers, so we wanted to be able to tell them where those parts were that they should go get. And as I mentioned, whether it was in this building or a different building, and if I'm giving that to a replenishment person in this building, he doesn't really care that it's available necessarily in the other building because he can't go get it there. So to add to the list of challenges, we had some issues around common parts that could be used on multiple different jobs at the same time. I mentioned the shared source inventory. We had some complications at one plant where we had a job that could be built on more than one work center. Either they got to choose based on which work center was available. That made things a little difficult. We used cell assemblies. And certainly data was a question. As we went to roll this out at each plant and someone said, hey, the replenishment report is wrong, then you had a whole host of things you had to go through to determine, well, why is it wrong? Is it something in the setup? Is it our bombs are wrong? Do we actually have the right quantities on them? We found what we used to drive the replenishment was the rates on the process routing. So now we're a standard costing shop, so we had what's the standard pieces per hour that would be produced for this. And so we would say if I'm looking at a 2-hour time window and I make 200 pieces an hour, I would need 400 pieces. Well, if that standard rate didn't reflect reality and it's just what they used for standard costing, we were giving them all sorts of crazy numbers. And you would hope that those would be fairly similar. Turned out in some of our plants in China, maybe they were 10-fold different than reality. And so it screwed up the entire replenishment process. So that was a challenge. We ended up having to use, thankfully Plex has 3 different rate fields on the process routing. So we had only been using one, so we decided to use another one. One represented standard, one represented actual. And we had to sometimes swap those around because they showed up on different kinds of reports. But that allowed us to put the real rate of production on there. Sort order. So one of the other challenges we found was that we would roll it out and they'd say, well, it told me to bring the wrong things. And we would look at the jobs that were scheduled for that work center and the sort order that was on them. As you create jobs, you can have dates and that, but at the end of the day, we ended up having to do it by the sort order of the jobs. Some lines gave the line supervisor the ability to change that order, some didn't. But at the end of the day, we told them, look, if you want the replenishment to be right, make sure the jobs are in the right order. so that when you finish the one you're working on, you will actually produce the next one, and we will have brought the right parts. You don't pick the one that's 5 down that we haven't brought any parts for yet. So we did drive that by sort order. Pick list to scan. So they had asked, got a number of requirements. Some of the plants were doing something previously in their old system where they would scan empty containers, or they would have some kind of a screen they would interact with, so they'd say, well, when I've brought this to the line, I need a place where I can check off that I did that, so it will go off my list. And we argued with them about that, and at the end of the day we said, look, we're going to tell you what you need. You can look at it on the screen, you can print it out if you want to. After you bring the stuff, just rerun the report, and it will, because basically when you do the move and it sees that inventory at the work center, it will then drop off the list as something you need to go get. So that worked out fine. And then on the FIFO, of course everybody says they want FIFO, but the time that the guy goes to get it and he can't find the oldest container, he still needs to bring the parts, right? So invariably all the plants, they wanted a message. We had Plex at one point create a FIFO restrict for the mobile move screen that basically said if you go to scan one in and it's not the oldest, to give the operator a stop or a warning. We ended up with it being a warning, and that you had to have a permission if you were able to override that FIFO warning or not. And in most places everybody gets the override, but we did also have that written to, I believe it gets written on the container history, that says that basically there was a FIFO override done, and then you could write a report to say when, who's been doing all these FIFO overrides, and how often do they occur, and who's doing them, so that you could determine, are you really violating FIFO too much of the time, and is there a particular guy who just goes and gets whatever he wants and doesn't pay attention to it. And that's worked out fairly well. So we've talked about most of these. So this is a little bit of what the screen looks like. So as you can see, you can pick a work center. You can actually, it's a multi-picker, so you can pick your multiple work centers. You could do that by work center type if you wanted to, or by groups if you use work center groups. You get to pick your outlook horizon. There's some caveats there in terms of how big can you make this run. Of course, a lot of our plants out of the gate said, hey, great, let's run all work centers for the day. And we would have some timeout issues on that. Revolution Group did some performance tuning on the report as we got, we'd roll it out in one plant, and then we'd go to a plant that had 20,000 containers in it, and it didn't run as well. So they did a bunch of performance tuning so that all the plants could run it within reasonable horizons, generally that 2 to 4 hour window, even for a very large plant, they could run that. We got to indicate whether it was by building. So it was limiting it to the building that the work centers were in, or it would look at a building outside of that. Whether it was sorting by location or not, I believe that was for the pick portion of that. And whether I'm showing the deliver to work center field. So here is the top portion of the report that's showing, what do I need to go get. So for this work center, I've got these parts. Based on the BOM, this is the quantity I would need, and what I have, and then what I need that's missing from there. You can see we did add some pieces in. So now this is the what do you need to go get section, which is right below that. And it says, okay, this is based on what I told you is required. This is what you have to go get, how much of it, where it's at based on FIFO, which serial number, and how much is in that container, and when we received it. And in cases where there isn't enough, then we put a little red bar on there to say, hey, yeah, you need this, but we don't have any. This is the version we did that was for the supplier view. So once again, right with your supplier portal, forces in the supplier code, and then limits it to their parts that they supply to you. Pat, I don't know if you wanted to talk about these at all. No. So we went through this process. We built this with Revolution Group. They did the development work on it for us. And we did estimate that we would save both in terms of warehouse space, especially for our consignment suppliers. In terms of them delivering material to us, we would save space. We were reducing the number of trips. Sometimes we had a trip every hour to the offsite warehouse. So those were reduced by bringing just the parts we needed. We could give the material handlers a better, more accurate look at what needed to come based on forward-looking production instead of min-maxes or historical. So we could more accurately bring things to the line. People could cover multiple production lines or multiple work centers, and reduce downtime where we ran out of parts because we didn't have the right thing there. That's it. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Not a question then, but thank you because we use that daily.
Oh, good. It's funny when we brought this one up to Plex, and this is one of the challenges with CED, is I kind of figured that most customers, or a lot of customers, would want something like that because we all bring parts to our lines. At the time, Plex decided it would be a good CED development, and so Revolution Group worked on that with us. It was great for us because they were able to do it in a timely fashion for us and get it to us quicker than I think Plex could have gotten it into the queue. And then after we got it done, we had a lot of other customers of Plex who say, hey, we want that too. And the beauty of it was that Revolution Group offers that free to everybody who wants it. And I'm sure that they've gotten add-on business for that in terms of people who want to tweak that for their own needs. But yeah, it's been a good product. We use it now at almost all of our plants. Basically, when we come in, that is our preferred method of replenishment that we turn on for all of our plants. Yeah.
Okay, Ben, you may have said it, but I might have missed it. But the material handler, how do they get do they run the report and print it, or do they have a tablet, or how do they get that information?
We've looked at using tablets for that. We're actually testing some tablets right now. Right now, they generally have a PC over in the warehouse area. They bring it up, they print it, and then the guy puts it on, runs around and go gets the stuff, and probably checks them off with a pen as he goes, and then he just reruns it at the next interval later. But yeah, tablet would be a great tool for that too.
We've started using tablets down at our Mexican facility, and it's actually the supervisors have tablets, and that's how they walk around and work the work centers, et cetera.
Yeah, and they generally, most of our plants, those material handlers they're carrying around MC9090s and using the mobile move screen. But yeah, we've started testing some tablets too with little Bluetooth scanners, and whether or not they could actually use the tablet to run it and to do the moves if they wanted to as well. So we've got requests for tablets on this, shipping, receiving, preventative maintenance, and that kind of across the board.
Compare notes on the Bluetooth scanners.
Yeah.
We're struggling with the scanner.
Yeah, we're struggling with that a little bit too.
USB tether hanging on.
Yeah.
Who else is using tablets? You guys have tablets on some of your forklifts, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And they have a tablet with a tethered scanner? Yeah.
Yeah, we've been using them on our forklifts for a while as well. Yeah.
Bluetooth scanners, they seem to be working pretty well. They're not fully implemented, but we use them on inventory, locating and checking.
Has anybody found a good tablet that runs a browser that's fully Plex compliant and it has a nice rugged case?
We buy from Dell. Dell makes them. We have a Windows 7 Pro version that we lock out that runs, supports. We downgraded the browser to 9. And we've had no issues with it.
It's a Surface, or like it's the
Surface,
oh, okay.
Running Windows 8.
Okay.
We purchased the Windows 8 tablet, and then we downgraded
Okay.
the 7 Pro and just run off that, and it runs just as quickly and cleanly as the desktops or anything else we run.
Did they have a rugged case for it too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We purchased an additional rugged case.
Okay.
People tend to get a little more rugged. We have maintenance generally, you're like broken 2 or 3, in about a month's time, 2 months' time. So that'll happen. Run them over with a tow motor. So.
Yeah, interesting. We'd also looked at tablets for, especially if you're looking at a Microsoft tablet. We've got we were doing traditional PCs for our work centers for running control panel. Sometimes we do touch screens. We've done some thin clients, and so we started, hey, when the like the Surface came out, could we just put a tablet out there that's a touch screen? Would that be a cost savings for us as well? We haven't done that yet, but we're looking at that as well. Yeah.
Is the FIFO warning notice, is that just a setting that needs to be turned on?
Yep. Yeah. I think there's a setting and a permission. So it's a FIFO FIFO enforce or something like that, and then there's a permission that's FIFO override that you can add to a security role.
And then would you have the ability to like monthly run a report to see who your culprits were that are constantly overwriting?
Yeah, in fact, we set up an Inteva report to run on a schedule. I think they wanted it every week to go to a supervisor to say, what are all the times that FIFO override got written to container history and who was the operator. Great, thank you.
Thank
Yep.
you.